Hello everybody, it's Jamie from Old Shipping Lines, and welcome back to a new video. In today's video, we're going to talk about a German liner that many of you may have heard of before, of the MS St. Louis. She's best known for her tragic voyage during World War II, famously called the Voyage of the Damned. But beyond that heartbreaking chapter, this ship has a story that truly deserves to be told. So, join me as we explore the full story of the MS St. Louis, from her construction and early days to the tragic voyage that defined her legacy, and finally, her scrapping. The vessel would be owned by the renowned German shipping company, the Hamburg America Line. She would be constructed by the esteemed German shipbuilders Bremer Vulcan, based in Bremen, Germany. Now, let us dive into the specifics of this ship. Her gross tonnage would be 16,732 gross registered tons. She would have had a length of 574 feet, and she would have had a beam of 72 feet. Powered by 4 double-acting 6-cylinder 2-stroke diesel engines, the ship achieved a modest speed of 6.5 knots. This vessel would not sail alone, as she had a sister ship named the MS Milwaukee. The St. Louis was launched on August 2nd, 1928. Her sister ship, the MS Milwaukee, followed soon after with her launch on February 20th, 1929. The St. Louis embarked on her maiden voyage from Hamburg to New York City on March 28th, 1929. Following this inaugural voyage, she primarily served the North Atlantic route, connecting Hamburg to Halifax and New York. Additionally, the St. Louis operated 16 to 17-day cruises to destinations such as the Canary Islands, Madeira, and Morocco, particularly during the autumn and spring seasons. Starting in 1934, the ship was also chartered during the summer by the Strength Through Joy program's Office for Travel, Hiking, and Holidays, carrying up to 900 holiday makers on voyages to Norway. Now we turn to the tragic voyage famously known as the Voyage of the Damned. Under the command of Captain Gustav Schroeder, the St. Louis departed from Hamburg on May 13th, 1939, bound for Havana, Cuba. On board were 937 passengers, the majority of whom were Jewish refugees desperately fleeing Nazi persecution in Germany. Captain Schroeder, a German himself, went to great lengths to ensure his passengers were treated with dignity and respect. Despite food rationing in Germany, meals on board included items that were otherwise scarce, and childcare was provided so parents could dine in peace. The voyage featured dances and concerts, while Friday evenings saw religious services held in the dining room where a bust of Hitler was discreetly covered with a tablecloth. Passengers even enjoyed swimming lessons in the pool. Lothar Moulton, a young boy traveling with his parents, later recalled that the passengers viewed the voyage as a vacation cruise to freedom. Upon reaching Cuba, the St. Louis anchored at 4 a.m. on May 27, 1939, at the far end of Havana Harbor, but she was denied access to the usual docking areas. The Cuban government, led by President Federico Laredo, refused to allow the refugees to disembark, despite their possession of legal tourist visas. Unbeknownst to the passengers, Cuban immigration laws had recently changed. On May 5, 1939, just months before the outbreak of World War II, Cuba enacted Decree 937. which restricted the entry of all foreigners except U.S. citizens, unless specifically authorized by Cuban officials and subject to a $500 bond. Tragically, the refugees were unaware that their landing permits had been invalidated just weeks prior. After 5 days in the harbor, only 28 passengers were permitted to disembark in Cuba. Among them were 22 Jewish refugees with valid U.S. visas, 4 Spanish citizens, and 2 Cuban nationals, all holding proper entry documents. The final person allowed ashore was a medical evacuee, a desperate passenger who had attempted suicide and was granted hospitalization in Havana. Records indicate that American officials, Secretary of State Cordell Hull and Secretary of the Treasury Henry Morgenthau, made efforts to persuade Cuba to accept the refugees, similar to the unsuccessful attempts by the American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which had urged the Cuban government. After most passengers were refused landing in Cuba, Captain Schroeder directed the St. Louis and her remaining 907 refugees towards the United States. He circled off the coast of Florida, hoping for permission from U.S. authorities to enter. Neither Hull nor President Franklin D. Roosevelt chose to intervene to admit the refugees. Captain Schroeder considered running the St. Louis aground along the coast to allow the refugees to escape, but acting on Hull's instructions, U.S. Coast Guard vessels shadowed the ship and prevented this. After the St. Louis was denied entry to the United States, a group of academics and clergy in Canada sought to persuade Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King to provide sanctuary for the passengers. The ship could have reached Halifax, Nova Scotia within 2 days. However, Frederick Blair, the director of Canada's immigration branch, who was hostile to Jewish immigration, convinced the government's head on June 9th not to intervene. As Captain Schroeder worked to find a safe haven for the passengers, conditions on the ship deteriorated. At one point, he even considered deliberately grounding the ship on the British coast to force the government to take in the refugees. Schroeder refused to return the ship to Germany until all passengers were granted entry to another country. U.S. officials collaborated with Britain and other European nations to find refuge for the Jews. The ship eventually returned to Europe, docking at the port of Antwerp, Belgium on June 17, 1939, with all 908 passengers still on board. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain agreed to take 288 passengers who disembarked and traveled to the UK via other steamers. After extensive negotiation by Schroeder, the remaining 619 passengers were also allowed to disembark in Antwerp. France accepted 224 passengers, Belgium 214, and the Netherlands 181. The ship then returned to Hamburg without any passengers. The following year, after the Battle of France and the Nazi occupation of Belgium, France, and the Netherlands in May 1940, all Jews in those countries faced increased risk, including the recent refugees. Historians have estimated the survival rates for Jews from the St. Louis refugees, based on their locations and deportations during the war. Of the 180 St. Louis refugees in France, 152 in Belgium, and 60 in the Netherlands survived the Holocaust. Including the passengers who reached England, of the original 936 refugees, one man died during the voyage. Approximately 709 survived the war, while 227 perished. Later research tracing each passenger revealed that 254 of those who returned to continental Europe were ultimately murdered during the Holocaust. Of the 620 St. Louis passengers who returned to continental Europe, 87 were able to emigrate before Germany's invasion of Western Europe on May 10, 1940. After that date, 254 passengers in Belgium, France, and the Netherlands died during the Holocaust. Most of these individuals were murdered in the camps of Auschwitz and Sobibor. Others died in internment camps, in hiding, or while attempting to evade the Nazis. Of the 365 passengers who returned to continental Europe, the majority survived the war. Among the 288 passengers sent to Britain, the vast majority were alive at the end of the war. After the war, the Federal Republic of Germany awarded Captain Gustav Schröder the Order of Merit. In 1993, he was posthumously recognized as one of the righteous among the nations at the Yad Vashem Holocaust Memorial in Israel. After the tragic voyage, the St. Louis was converted into a German naval accommodation ship from 1940 to 1944. The ship was heavily damaged by Allied bombings at Kiel on August 30th, 1944. After being repaired, she served as a hotel ship in Hamburg in 1946. The MS St. Louis was sold and scrapped in Bremerhaven in 1952. And that marks the end of a video, my friends. Thank you all so very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Now, if you liked what you saw, please consider subscribing to the channel, as that would help out the channel a lot. Now, if you have any thoughts, comments or questions, please leave them in the comment section down below, as I absolutely love reading your comments. And please let me know in the comment section down below as well what ships you would like me to cover in the future. Now be as well sure to check out our social media pages. We are on Twitter, we are on Instagram, and we also recently have a website, oldshippinglines.com, where we have articles of the ships we cover and we have book reviews as well. I think you will enjoy the website very much. Now, with that out of the way, guys, I wish you all a good night or day, wherever you are. Stay safe, stay happy, and we will see each other on the next video. Goodbye, my friends.